Did you mean that text? The billionaire CEO knocked on her assistant's door 5 minutes later. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's emotional story about two women discovering love in the most unexpected way, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss a new story from our channel. It is quick, it is free, and it helps us continue bringing you more heartfelt, dramatic and unforgettable stories about courage, healing and love between women. Your support truly means the world to us. And tell me, where are you watching from today? Share your city or country in the comments below. Thank you so much. Now let us return to our main character and the moment her life began to change. Sometimes the smallest mistake becomes the doorway to the life you never knew you were waiting for. My name is Hannah Brooks, and if you had asked me that Tuesday morning what the most dangerous thing in my life was, I would have said my calendar. Every minute belonged to someone else. Every email demanded an answer before I finished reading the last one. Every meeting seemed more important than the one before it. Working as the executive assistant to Claire Whitmore, the youngest billionaire CEO in our company's history, meant living 3 steps ahead of everyone else. At least that was what I believed until one text message proved how completely wrong I was. People loved to write articles about Claire. They called her the Ice Queen of Manhattan, the woman who had turned a struggling technology company into one of America's fastest-growing corporations before her 40th birthday. Business magazines praised her discipline. Financial analysts admired her instincts. Social media painted her as someone who never smiled, never rested, and never made mistakes. I had worked beside her for nearly 4 years, and I knew there was another version of Claire that almost nobody ever saw. She thanked the cleaning staff by name every evening. She remembered every employee's birthday without checking a calendar. She quietly paid for surgeries, scholarships, and emergency expenses without allowing anyone to know where the money came from. She simply insisted the accounting department label everything as anonymous employee assistance. I often wondered why someone capable of so much kindness worked so hard to hide it behind a perfectly tailored suit and an expression that discouraged conversation. Maybe she believed leaders had to appear untouchable. Maybe the higher she climbed, the lonelier the view became. That Tuesday had started before sunrise with delayed flights, a nervous board meeting, and an unexpected investor presentation that forced us to cancel lunch. By 9 that evening, most of the building had gone dark except for the executive floor where Claire remained inside her office reviewing contracts while I organized tomorrow's schedule. The silence felt unusually heavy, interrupted only by the distant hum of air conditioning and the occasional vibration of my phone. I finally shut down my laptop, slipped on my coat, and wished Claire good night through her half-open office door. She looked up briefly, her tired blue eyes softer than usual. "Drive safely, Hannah," she said with a faint smile that lasted less than a second before disappearing behind another stack of documents. I smiled back and headed home, grateful that tomorrow might be a little quieter. I couldn't have been more wrong. 5 minutes after I walked into my apartment, my phone buzzed. I expected another calendar change or a reminder from accounting. Instead, I saw Claire's name at the top of my screen and one sentence beneath it. "I think I'm falling for her." I stared at the words, convinced I had misunderstood them. My heart didn't race because of romance. It raced because nothing about that message made sense. Before I could decide whether to answer, apologize for reading something never meant for me, or simply pretend it had never arrived, someone knocked gently on my apartment door. I glanced at the clock. Exactly 5 minutes had passed since the text. The second knock came softer than the first, almost hesitant, and that alone told me something was terribly different. Claire Whitmore was many things, but hesitant had never been one of them. I walked toward the door with my phone still clutched in my hand, the glowing message refusing to disappear from the screen no matter how many times I blinked. When I opened the door, she stood there wearing the same charcoal coat she had left the office in, her hair slightly windswept by the cool Manhattan evening, her expression composed only from years of practice. Beneath that carefully constructed calm, I saw something I had never seen before. She looked frightened, not of me but of what a single sentence could change. "I am sorry," she said before I could speak. "That message was not supposed to come to you." I nodded because that much was obvious, yet neither of us moved. The hallway remained perfectly still except for the faint sound of an elevator somewhere down the corridor. Finally, I stepped aside. "Would you like to come in?" I asked. She hesitated again before accepting with a quiet thank you. My apartment was small compared to the penthouse everyone assumed she lived in, though I had never asked where she actually called home. Books lined one wall, family photographs rested on narrow shelves, and a faded quilt my mother had sewn years ago covered the couch. Claire glanced around with genuine curiosity instead of judgment. "This feels peaceful," she said softly. "I cannot remember the last time I walked into a place that felt like someone truly lived here." I offered her a cup of tea instead of coffee since it was already past 9. She accepted, and for several moments neither of us mentioned the message. We spoke about ordinary things instead. The investor meeting. The weather forecast predicting rain. A delayed flight that had frustrated half the executive team. It almost felt normal until Claire quietly set her mug on the table and folded her hands together. "I owe you the truth," she said. "The text was meant for my college roommate. She has spent months telling me I work too much and never allow anyone close enough to know who I really am." She paused, searching for words with the same care she usually reserved for billion-dollar negotiations. She asked me this afternoon if there was anyone who had changed the way I looked at life. I answered too quickly and accidentally sent it to you. My heart became strangely heavy, not because she admitted the mistake, but because her voice carried an exhaustion no newspaper interview had ever captured. For the first time since I had known her, she was not speaking as the brilliant executive who always had every answer. She sounded like a woman who had spent years carrying expectations that grew heavier with every promotion. I thought back to countless evenings when I had watched her remain in the office long after everyone else left, reviewing reports under the glow of a single desk lamp while the city outside celebrated another night without her. Success had surrounded Claire with admiration, but perhaps admiration was not the same thing as companionship. I finally broke the silence. "You could have explained this tomorrow." She smiled faintly and shook her head. "No. Some misunderstandings become larger every hour you allow them to breathe. I did not want you wondering all night whether I had crossed a line or whether I expected something from you. You deserve better than uncertainty." Her words surprised me because they reflected the same quiet respect she showed every employee regardless of position. In that moment, the billionaire CEO disappeared completely, leaving only Claire, a woman who valued honesty enough to drive across Manhattan, simply to prevent another person from carrying unnecessary confusion into tomorrow. Claire remained for less than 30 minutes, yet after she left my apartment felt completely different. The quiet no longer carried confusion. Instead, it carried questions I had never expected to ask myself. Before leaving, she paused beside the door with one hand resting lightly on the frame. "There is one more thing," she said. "Tomorrow, I would like us to pretend tonight never happened inside the office. Not because I am ashamed of being honest, but because I never want you to feel that your position depends on anything except your talent." I nodded immediately. I would not want anyone thinking differently either. She smiled with visible relief. "Thank you, Hannah." Then she stepped into the hallway, and within seconds the elevator doors quietly closed behind her. I stood there much longer than I intended, replaying every word in my mind. The next morning, Manhattan woke beneath gray clouds that promised rain before noon. By the time I reached headquarters, the lobby buzzed with its usual rhythm. Employees hurried toward elevators carrying coffee cups and laptops while television screens displayed another interview praising Claire's latest business acquisition. Watching those polished headlines, I almost laughed. They spoke about quarterly growth, market confidence, and corporate expansion, but not one reporter had any idea that the woman they admired had spent part of the previous evening apologizing in person for a simple mistake, because she believed respect mattered more than convenience. As soon as I reached the executive floor, everything appeared perfectly normal. Claire was already inside the conference room leading the morning strategy meeting with the same calm confidence everyone expected. She greeted each executive by name, asked thoughtful questions, challenged weak proposals, and somehow remembered details from conversations held weeks earlier. If I had not opened my apartment door the night before, I would have believed she had never left the office at all. When our eyes briefly met across the conference table, she offered nothing more than a polite professional nod before returning her attention to the presentation. Strangely, that tiny gesture reassured me more than any secret smile could have. She had kept her promise. Nothing had changed where work was concerned. Around lunchtime, I walked downstairs to deliver signed documents to Human Resources. As I passed the employee wellness office, I noticed a young maintenance worker sitting quietly outside with his head lowered. His uniform was still dusty from the morning shift. Before I reached the elevator, Claire appeared from the opposite hallway. She slowed when she noticed the man and sat beside him without the slightest concern for the expensive suit she was wearing. They spoke softly for several minutes. I could not hear every word, but I caught enough to understand that his daughter had been accepted into college, and he was worried he could not afford tuition. Claire listened without interrupting. She asked about the girl's plans, smiled when he described her dream of becoming a teacher, then quietly handed him a folded business card. "Speak with the employee assistant's office this afternoon," she said. "Tell them I approved the education grant personally. Your daughter has worked too hard to stop now." The man looked overwhelmed, thanking her again and again while she simply wished him a wonderful day before walking away as though nothing extraordinary had happened. She did not notice that I had witnessed the entire conversation. Standing there, I finally understood something that no annual report could ever measure. Claire did not build successful companies because she loved money. She built them because she believed success gave her more opportunities to quietly lift other people higher. At that moment, the mistaken text no longer felt like the most important event of the previous night. Somehow, seeing the kindness she never advertised revealed far more about the woman behind the title than any accidental message ever could. Over the following weeks, something subtle began to change, although neither Claire nor I ever acknowledged it aloud. We honored our unspoken agreement with absolute care. Inside the office, she remained my chief executive officer, and I remained her executive assistant. Every meeting started on time. Every presentation was perfectly organized. Every business trip followed the same meticulous schedule I had built for years. To anyone watching, nothing had changed. Yet beneath the surface, I found myself paying closer attention to the quiet moments that everyone else overlooked. One Thursday afternoon, our calendar included a visit to one of the company's regional offices in Brooklyn. The official purpose was to celebrate the completion of a new innovation center, but Claire insisted on arriving nearly an hour early. I assumed she wanted extra time to prepare for her speech. Instead, she asked me to stop first at the employee cafeteria. The kitchen staff looked surprised to see the chief executive officer walking through the serving line carrying her own tray. She greeted every cook by name, thanked the woman who had prepared the soup, and asked another employee how his son's baseball season was going. None of it appeared rehearsed, felt as natural as breathing. Later that afternoon, while the executives gathered in the conference room discussing expansion plans, I noticed Claire quietly excuse herself. Curious, I stepped into the hallway a few minutes later and found her sitting beside an older receptionist whose hands trembled slightly as she filled out retirement paperwork. Claire listened patiently while the woman admitted she was frightened about leaving after 32 years because she no longer knew who she was without her job. Claire smiled with gentle understanding. "A career can become part of your identity," she said softly, "but it should never become the only reason you believe your life has value. The people who love you have never measured your worth by your job title." The receptionist wiped away grateful tears and laughed through them. "You always know the right thing to say." Claire shook her head. "No. I only know what I wish someone had reminded me years ago." Those words stayed with me for the rest of the day. On the drive back to Manhattan, rain tapped softly against the windows while the city lights blurred into streaks of gold across the glass. Claire reviewed financial reports in the back seat as usual, but eventually she closed the folder and looked out the window. "Do you ever wonder," she asked quietly, "whether success can become another way of hiding?" The question caught me completely off guard. "Hiding from what?" I asked. She smiled without taking her eyes off the passing skyline. "From loneliness, from disappointment, from the fear that if you stop achieving, people will stop believing you matter." I considered my answer carefully. "I think the people who truly care never confuse your accomplishments with your value." She turned toward me then, her expression thoughtful, almost surprised. "Your mother must have taught you that." I laughed softly. "She did. She spent years working double shifts as a nurse, But she always told me that kindness was the only promotion nobody could ever take away. Claire nodded slowly, repeating the sentence under her breath, as though she wanted to remember every word. The rest of the ride passed in comfortable silence, yet it felt different from any silence we had shared before. It no longer belonged to a chief executive officer and her assistant. It belonged to two women carrying invisible responsibilities, each slowly discovering that the strongest people are not those who never feel alone, but those who continue choosing kindness, even while carrying burdens nobody else can see. By the beginning of October, our routine had settled into something steady and surprisingly comforting. The accidental message had faded into the background, replaced by ordinary conversations that somehow carried extraordinary meaning. We spoke about project deadlines, airport delays, and quarterly forecasts, but every so often one of us would ask a question that had nothing to do with business. Claire wanted to know which books my mother used to read to me as a child. I asked what she had dreamed of becoming before she ever imagined running a global company. A music teacher, she admitted with a quiet laugh. I played the piano for years until everyone convinced me I should focus on something more practical. I smiled. The world gained a remarkable chief executive officer, but somewhere it lost a wonderful music teacher. She looked out the window for a long moment before answering. Maybe both versions of me are still somewhere inside. Those words stayed with me for days. Then just when life seemed almost peaceful, everything shifted. It began with whispers in the executive offices. A board member named Richard Ellison had started asking unusual questions about my schedule, Claire's calendar, and every meeting we attended together. At first it felt harmless. Board members often requested internal reviews before the final quarter of the year. But soon the questions became strangely personal. Had I ever visited Claire outside work? How often did we travel alone? Why had she recently declined several networking dinners she once attended without fail? I answered every question honestly because there was nothing to hide. Even so, something about the investigation felt less like governance and more like someone searching for a story that did not exist. 2 days later, I walked into the executive floor earlier than usual and found several employees staring at their phones. The atmosphere felt tense. My closest coworker quietly handed me her screen. An anonymous business blog had published an article suggesting that Claire showed favoritism toward a senior employee, whose identity remained unnamed, but was described closely enough that everyone inside the company could recognize me. There were no facts, no evidence, only carefully arranged speculation designed to sound believable. Reading those words made my stomach tighten, not because I feared for myself, but because I knew how quickly public doubt could damage a leader's credibility. Claire called me into her office less than 10 minutes later. She was standing beside the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Midtown, her hands folded calmly behind her back. The city outside continued moving as though nothing had happened. "Close the door, please," she said gently. I did. She turned toward me with the same composed expression she wore during shareholder meetings, but I recognized the sadness hidden beneath it. "I want you to hear this directly from me," she said. "The board will begin an ethics review this afternoon. Richard requested it." I felt my heart sink. "Because of those rumors?" She nodded once. "Rumors rarely create real damage by themselves. They become dangerous when people find them useful." I searched her face, expecting anger or frustration, but found neither. Instead, she looked almost disappointed, as though she had seen this kind of situation many times before. "Claire," I said quietly, "what happens now?" She offered a reassuring smile that somehow made my chest ache even more. "Now we tell the truth. We cooperate completely. And no matter what happens, I will make certain that your career is protected. You accepted this job to build your future, Hannah. I will not allow my position to become the reason that future is taken away from you." Claire kept her promise. By the end of the week, she had voluntarily submitted every email, every calendar entry, every travel record, and every expense report connected to my work. Independent auditors interviewed both of us separately, and every answer matched because there had never been anything dishonest to hide. Still, the rumors refused to disappear. Facts moved slowly, but speculation traveled at the speed of curiosity. Investors began asking difficult questions. Reporters gathered outside headquarters hoping someone would offer a dramatic headline. Employees tried to remain focused, Yet anxiety settled over every floor of the building like a heavy winter cloud. Then came the emergency board meeting that changed everything. I was organizing documents outside the conference room when the doors finally opened nearly 3 hours later. One executive after another walked past me without saying a word. Their faces revealed enough. Claire stepped into the hallway carrying only a slim folder instead of the stack of reports she had brought with her that morning. She looked tired but remarkably peaceful. "Would you come with me for a moment?" she asked. We entered her office, and she closed the door quietly behind us. Sunlight stretched across the floor through the tall windows, making the room feel strangely calm despite everything happening outside. Claire placed the folder on her desk and looked directly at me. "I have resigned as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately." For a moment I forgot how to breathe. "What?" I whispered. "They cannot ask you to do that. There is no evidence that either of us has done anything wrong." She nodded gently. "There is not. The ethics review confirmed exactly that." "Then why?" My voice shook despite every effort to stay composed. Claire walked toward the window and looked down at the streets below where thousands of people hurried through another ordinary afternoon. "Because leadership is not only about being right," she said quietly. "Sometimes it is about protecting something larger than yourself. The board is divided. Investors are becoming nervous. If this conflict continues, expansion projects will stop, contracts will be delayed, and people who have nothing to do with these rumors may lose their jobs." I stared at her in disbelief. "So you are sacrificing everything you built?" She turned back toward me with a gentle smile that carried no bitterness. "No, Hannah. I am protecting what we built. Companies are not buildings. They are people. More than 4,000 families depend on the decisions made inside this office every day. If stepping away gives them stability, then this is the easiest decision I have made in years." My eyes filled before I realized it. "That is not fair." Claire laughed softly, though sadness lingered behind her eyes. "Life rarely is. But fairness and kindness are not the same thing. We cannot always choose what is fair. We can choose what is kind." She opened the folder and removed several signed documents. Along with her resignation, she had transferred part of her personal shares into an employee ownership trust that would strengthen retirement benefits and protect jobs during the company's transition. She had even established an expanded education fund so every employee's child could apply for college assistance regardless of income. "You planned all of this already," I said quietly. She nodded. "I have been preparing for every possible outcome since the first rumor appeared." Looking around the office that had become almost a second home to both of us, I suddenly understood that true leadership was never about holding the highest title. It was about being willing to let go of that title when keeping it might cost thousands of ordinary people the security they deserved. In that silent room surrounded by awards that suddenly seemed meaningless, I realized the greatest success Claire Whitmore had ever achieved could never be measured on a balance sheet. It was written instead in the countless lives she chose to protect before thinking of her own. The news of Claire's resignation spread across the company before the end of the afternoon, and the silence that followed felt heavier than any announcement I had ever scheduled. People did not celebrate a leadership change. They stood in hallways, gathered around coffee stations, and whispered the same question to one another. Why would someone who had done nothing wrong choose to walk away? By the next morning, I realized I could no longer remain silent either. The rumors had started because strangers filled empty spaces with assumptions. The truth deserved the same opportunity to be heard. I requested permission to speak during the company-wide employee meeting that had originally been organized to introduce the interim chief executive officer. Nearly every seat in the auditorium was filled. Thousands more watched through the internal live stream from offices across the country. My hands trembled as I stepped onto the stage, but when I saw familiar faces looking back at me, I remembered every act of kindness Claire had quietly given without ever asking for recognition. I took a slow breath and began. I told them about the accidental text message that had started everything. I explained exactly what had happened, how Claire had appeared at my apartment only minutes later, not to defend herself or justify her feelings, but to apologize for a mistake and make certain I never questioned my professional future. I described the agreement we had both honored from that evening forward, maintaining clear professional boundaries and treating one another with complete respect inside the workplace. Then I shared the moments no newspaper had ever reported. The education grant for the maintenance worker's daughter. The conversations with employees approaching retirement. The anonymous financial assistance given to families during difficult times. The countless evenings Claire remained long after everyone else had gone home, not because she wanted attention, but because she refused to ask others to carry burdens she could shoulder herself. The auditorium became so quiet that I could hear my own heartbeat. When I finished speaking, I expected questions. Instead, an older woman from the accounting department slowly stood. She had worked at the company for more than 25 years. With tears in her eyes, she said, "Claire paid for my husband's cancer treatment 3 years ago. She made the hospital promise never to tell me where the money came from. I only learned the truth last month." Another employee rose. Then another. A software engineer explained how Claire had personally encouraged him to finish graduate school. A receptionist spoke about flowers that arrived every year on the anniversary of her mother's passing without a name attached. One by one, stories filled the room until it became impossible to dismiss them as coincidence. They revealed a pattern of quiet generosity that had shaped hundreds of lives. Someone in the back of the auditorium began applauding. Within seconds, the entire room was standing. The sound echoed through every floor of the building. Employees watching remotely joined the applause through video screens, some wiping away tears, others simply smiling with gratitude. Later that afternoon, clips from the meeting spread across social media after employees shared their own experiences. Public opinion shifted with astonishing speed. Journalists who had repeated rumors now reported verified stories of compassion and ethical leadership. Investors publicly praised Claire's decision to protect the company instead of herself. Even several board members admitted they had underestimated the trust she had earned from the people who knew her best. As I left the auditorium that evening, my phone vibrated with a single message from Claire. It contained only one sentence. "Thank you for reminding everyone that truth becomes strongest when it is spoken with kindness." I looked up at the fading Manhattan skyline and smiled, realizing that while rumors had once traveled faster than honesty, genuine character had a remarkable way of reaching people in the end. The weeks that followed felt quieter than any season I could remember. Claire did not return to the executive office, even after the board publicly acknowledged that the investigation had found no wrongdoing. Several directors invited her to reclaim her position, but she declined with genuine gratitude. "I have spent years believing that slowing down meant falling behind," she told me one afternoon as we walked through Central Park beneath trees glowing with late autumn colors. "Now I think slowing down might be the first time I have actually been paying attention." Without the weight of endless board meetings and investor calls, she rediscovered parts of herself that had been waiting patiently for years. The old piano in her apartment was tuned for the first time in almost a decade. She began taking evening lessons again, laughing whenever she missed a note and celebrating every small improvement with the enthusiasm of someone discovering music for the first time. Watching her play reminded me that success was not always measured by reaching the highest place. Sometimes it was measured by returning to the person you had almost forgotten. My own life changed just as much. The interim leadership team asked me to accept a new position overseeing executive operations across the company. Months earlier, I would have doubted I was capable of handling such responsibility. Claire refused to let me doubt myself. "Confidence is not pretending you have every answer," she told me during one of our weekend coffee walks. "Confidence is trusting that you will keep learning after every mistake." Those words became the quiet foundation beneath every decision I made. As time passed, our friendship deepened naturally, never rushed and never hidden. We met for bookstore visits, community volunteer events, and long conversations over homemade soup instead of expensive restaurants. We discovered that we both loved old architecture, rainy afternoons, and handwritten letters. We disagreed about baseball teams and laughed about it every season. The connection between us grew from honesty instead of expectation, from shared values instead of dramatic moments. One snowy evening in December, we volunteered together at a holiday dinner organized for families facing financial hardship. Claire spent nearly an hour helping children decorate cookies, while I served meals beside retired employees who greeted her with warm hugs. Nobody treated her like a billionaire. Nobody cared about former titles or newspaper headlines. She was simply Claire, smiling as flour covered the sleeves of her sweater, while a little girl proudly presented an unevenly frosted cookie. Driving home through gently falling snow, I realized how peaceful the silence between us had become. There was no uncertainty left inside it, only comfort. Claire glanced toward me as we waited at a red light. "Do you know what surprises me most?" she asked. I shook my head. For years I thought respect came from being the person with the biggest office. Now I think real respect comes from being the person others feel safe enough to become themselves around. I reached over and lightly squeezed her hand for just a moment before returning mine to my lap, a simple gesture filled with quiet reassurance. She smiled with the kind of warmth that no magazine cover had ever captured. Neither of us spoke about the future that night. We did not need to. Whatever came next would not be built on status, wealth, or titles. It would be built on trust, patience, kindness, and the remarkable discovery that the strongest relationships often begin when two people stop trying to impress one another and simply choose, day after day, to be genuine. 5 years passed more quickly than either of us could have imagined. Looking back, it no longer seemed remarkable that everything had changed because of a single mistaken message. What truly changed our lives was every decision that followed it. Claire never returned to the corner office overlooking Manhattan, even though the board invited her more than once. Instead, she founded the Whitmore Opportunity Foundation, an organization dedicated to providing college scholarships, career mentorship, and emergency financial assistance for women rebuilding their lives after unexpected hardship. She often said that helping one person discover hope created a ripple that reached families, neighborhoods, and future generations. I accepted the role of executive director for the foundation, bringing together educators, community leaders, and volunteers from across the country. Every scholarship letter we mailed reminded me of the maintenance worker's daughter, whose dream had almost ended because of money. Every mentoring program reminded me that encouragement sometimes changes a life more deeply than any paycheck ever could. On the 5th anniversary of the foundation's opening, we hosted a celebration in the same company auditorium where I had once spoken the truth during the most uncertain week of my career. This time the room was filled with students who had graduated because someone believed in them, parents who no longer feared losing their homes after medical emergencies, and employees whose families had been strengthened by quiet acts of generosity. One young teacher approached Claire with tears in her eyes. "I was the first recipient of your education grant," she said. "Today I brought my own students because I wanted them to meet the woman who changed my future." Claire smiled with the same humility I had admired years earlier. "You changed your own future," she replied gently. "I only helped open one door. You were the one brave enough to walk through it." As the applause filled the auditorium, I looked around the room and realized that not a single person was talking about stock prices, billion-dollar acquisitions, or executive titles. They were talking about kindness, opportunity, second chances, and the extraordinary difference one compassionate decision could make. Later that evening, after the guests had gone home, Claire and I walked through Bryant Park beneath thousands of glowing lights. Winter had returned to New York, just as it had the night she stood outside my apartment door with an apology she could easily have postponed until morning. We stopped near the ice skating rink where children laughed while learning to keep their balance. Claire slipped her hand gently into mine, and I smiled because the gesture felt as natural as breathing. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if that message had gone to the right person?" I asked. She laughed softly. "Sometimes. But then I remember something you once told me. Kindness is the only promotion nobody can ever take away." We stood there quietly, watching families make memories that would outlast the season, and I understood that our greatest achievement had never been finding each other. It had been becoming the kind of people who could love without pride, lead without fear, forgive without hesitation, and use every blessing we receive to lift someone else a little higher. If this story has taught me anything, it is that success may open impressive doors, but character determines who you become after you walk through them. In the end, the most valuable fortune any person can ever build is not measured in dollars, but in the number of lives made brighter because they chose compassion when it mattered most.